Alright, well, we're at episode 30, and with you as always, me, Chucky, and we've got Jigsaw.
Indeed. How you doing?
Are you asking me or them?
Oh, I was asking you. It's okay.
I'm good. Well, a stellar lineup as usual. Anyways, we've got 5 movies. We've got Triangle from 2009. Bit of a wannabe mindfuck type movie, I guess. Then we move on to 80s slasher movie, Night School from 1981. Then we move on to Jack Frost 2, Revenge of the Mutant Killer Snowman. No explanation necessary for that. Then we've got the 4th installment of the Kickboxer movies, Kickboxer 4, The Aggressor from 1994. And then we finish things off with Battle Royale from 2000, a much beloved foreign movie.
And we are starting off tonight with Triangle. A somewhat interesting plot. There's a group of friends, and by friends I mean some of them know each other, but some of them don't. They don't seem like much friends to me, but they go on a sort of a yachting trip, but then this freak storm happens. Boat sort of capsizes and they almost die, but they find their way to this seemingly deserted cruise ship. And once they're there, strange time loop things start happening, in which one of the women finds out that she herself is on the ship, and things happen. I mean, it's a pretty well-known movie. It's pretty popular, and honestly, it's pretty well respected. I genuinely see positive reviews for this one. I've only seen this one twice now. I watched it just earlier today. I'm not a personal fan of the movie. My main problem being, I don't think it makes that much sense. I think the movie looks good. I think the plot's interesting. I just don't think it makes sense. But before and I do have a little to say about this movie. Before I go after it, what were your thoughts on this one? What's your history with this one?
Yeah, I can't remember if I tried to watch this back when, about 10 years ago when it came out. So I'm going to consider the viewing that I had recently as my first time watch. And yeah, I got some mixed feelings towards it. I mean, it is, like you said, it's got an interesting plot. I guess the problem for me is that because some of the characters and certain events happening throughout the film didn't excite me enough to really intrigue me enough to get invested into the plot. So I'm kind of looking at it more on the surface. Yes, we see this time loop thing going on, a lot of things reoccurring, almost to the point where I feel like I'm watching the movie over and over again. I'm kind of watching the same mediocre thing happen over and over again with slightly different things happening throughout. And then there's kind of like the twist reveal at the end, which I was kind of like, whatever.
Yeah, I wasn't very impressed with the way they concluded this. I mean, I feel like a lot of what they were going for, you could sort of see coming. Like, the whole, it's not uncommon that movies like this have to do with purgatory in some way or another, which may or may not be what this movie is talking about. But it's not like it's a deep surprise to me. Like, the whole conversation at the end with the taxi driver. Like, it's just, I guess one of my issues with this, when you get to a time loop type thing, the characters sort of, so some of these characters get killed, and then it doesn't matter because another version of them is still alive and they're just getting onto the ship. So, because of that, when a character dies, I mean, they're still alive in another form, so does it really matter? It's really hard to have any type of emotional impact. I mean, if you know they're going to be okay in some form, who cares? Which is actually not too different from, there's a series called Cube, and the second Cube movie deals a little bit with multiple dimension type things, which was a similar complaint I had for that movie. But I mean, this movie is interesting. I'm not going to say that the answers aren't there. I mean, I was just looking online before we started recording, and I found a pretty interesting looking diagram of the events in the movie with points of view and such. So, I mean, you can definitely watch this movie, and if you're looking for like a really deep, I guess, intellectual experience, you might be okay. But I guess one of my main complaints is this. If the woman realizes, the main character realizes she's in a time loop, and I think she does past a certain point, because she's seen the same things happen, I think 2 or 3 times by that point, and she tries to change things, but even when she changes things, the same things happen. If she knows she's in a time loop, then obviously she can't break out of the time loop, or else she would be in a time loop to begin with. And that's a common, I don't know if it's a complaint, but I guess a critique about time travel. And I think time travel is a very interesting thing when it comes to horror movies. There's not that many horror movies that deal with time type stuff. And some movies make it work. I'm not sure, Chucky, if you've seen I think it's a Mexican movie, a Spanish movie, titled Time Crimes, which came out, I think, 2007. And it's also sort of a 1 hour back in time type movie. I think it's actually a pretty decent movie. But this one, I think, was just, I don't know, too complex. Like, there were 2 different versions of the main character. We only follow one of them, maybe, but it's not clear cut. And that just, I'll be honest, it frustrated me. And I went into this one hoping to like it more than I did the first time I saw it, but I was not that lucky.
Even though I'm somewhat familiar with time crimes, I don't think I've fully given it a proper watch, but I do know that it's, at least with some of the cover art, it's got like a similar type, someone wearing some sort of mask type thing in it, similar to this.
Yeah, and I will say, I did read that some people thought that this movie Triangle was sort of ripping off time crimes, which is not the case. Apparently the scripts were being written around the same time, so I'm not. So I just want to make clear, I don't think this is trying to capitalize off time crimes, but I do think time crimes were not an amazing movie. I think it dealt with the subject matter a lot better than this one did. I mean, and that's sad. Like, this movie it's not terrible. It might not be the most exciting stuff. I think I sort of agree with you that this. I wasn't poured in that well. I mean, I really liked the scene in which the freak storm comes down and they're trying to save their ship. I mean, that was sort of cool, but most of the characters, I mean, were either blonde, bitchy, or like, who cares? And I don't know, there wasn't much in this movie. I mean, it looked nice, but otherwise, I don't think there's much in this movie going for it. It's a really nice poster though, so.
I mean, the look of the supposed masked killer in the movie is also interesting, I guess, if you're into it for that type of thing. Being slasher fans and seeing things of that nature in a lot of horror movies.
Yeah, I guess the unfortunate thing is, I think a shotgun was used a lot more than an axe was in this, and it's just disappointing.
Yeah.
I don't know, this movie, I feel like, and like I said, I think we're slightly in the minority, because many of the reviews I see for this one are decently positive, and it has a pretty good rating, a pretty fair rating on IMDb. I think it's a 6.9 right now, with almost 100,000 ratings, which it's decently impressive, but I just can't find myself caring that much. I'm not sure what the movie could have done that would gain my respect more, but they just were not able to do it.
It needed some nude scenes and...
I wondered. I mean, there were a few times when the main character, when she was looking decently attractive, shall we say?
Well, the funny thing is, who is it? Melissa George? Is that
yes?
Her?
Yeah.
I watched her for years on a Australian soap opera growing up that my family would watch, so I'm kind of used to seeing her really young from that show, and So now just seeing her in anything is just a bit weird, but I think she was, I can't remember what else I saw her in, but she was in a few other movies.
I do think she was in the Amityville Horror remake.
Yeah, that's probably the big one, yeah.
I mean, and she did fine in this. I mean, she was okay. It's just the story wasn't great.
Yeah.
So I'll just simply reiterate. I think the movie had potential. I think the story is interesting. I just don't think it was done particularly well. I would have liked a little more detail, a little more explanation, a little more something. But I was just frustrated and somewhat disappointed with rewatching this. So I'm going to... I had to think about this for a little. I'm going to throw it a 5.5. And I think I am going to round that up to a 6 out of 10. Which is still below average, but it's not like I hate the movie. I really think it could have been better. And I just don't think it's not like it's the greatest movie of the 2000s.
I'm tossing up between a 5 and a 6 out of 10 for myself as well. I'll give it the benefit of the doubt, and I'll go with 6, because I feel like I do need to give it another watch, another chance, and I feel like it's ceiling for me. If I rewatch and actually really enjoy it the next time, it would be a 7. But I don't hold out hope on enjoying it much more than I did the first time, so I'll be nice enough to give it a 6, and we'll see what happens next time. Let's move on to the next movie, Night School from 1981. There's this maniac on the loose, killing a bunch of chicks, and there's these cops out there trying to find this killer, and good times is had by all. This is a movie I have been wanting to watch for a while, and I've just never kind of been in the mood or gotten around to it. So I did watch this for the first time this past week. I'm a little disappointed in it just because I thought it could have been a little bit better than what it was. I think the slasher aspects of it are fairly... Let's just say the slasher aspects were decent. I think the movie fails a little bit more on the side of interesting characters. Not to say that they're completely dull, but all the different characters in the movie, from the teacher, the detectives, or none of the characters really did anything for me, and I was just waiting for each slasher type scene to occur. I actually really like the costume of the killer. I think it's somewhat unique and, kind of cool to see that character, but outside of those scenes, I'm kind of
Yeah, I think by far the most interesting character here was the lesbian schoolmaster. She just sort of cracked me up. Sort of chastising the one professor for sleeping with a student, and then, 6 scenes later, she's trying to do the same thing. But I think the main problem with this movie, and I've seen this one twice now, I think the main problem with it is that it's dry. I think the kills are decent. I'm not going to say they're great, but, they're decent. I like the aquarium scene, locker room attack. I thought that was pretty decent. And there's a pretty suspenseful sequence that takes place in a diner and then outside the diner. I enjoyed that too. But most of the story is sort of like procedural detective work, which has its place, but it just felt dry. It's dry, it's a bit dull, the characters somewhat lifeless. And the mystery it's interesting, I guess, but it's not the most engaging material.
Yeah. I don't know if you felt the same way about this, but anytime that teacher was on the screen, I felt like I was watching like an episode of Frasier without the comedy. Not that Frasier's like the most funniest show on the earth, but I don't know. I felt like I was watching Kelsey Grammer just trying to hook up with chicks.
and you would think that would make it more entertaining.
Yeah. One other thing that I thought was kind of amusing, and I guess this is just coincidence, but they have that one weird guy halfway through the movie that they're kind of interrogating or checking on, and I noticed he had a hockey mask in his room, which, like I said, is a bit of a funny coincidence considering this movie, I think, kind of was made just before Jason started using hockey masks. So, just looking at it from, you know, a horror fan seeing a hockey mask and having it, you know, belong to this weird guy, and just before Friday the 13th started using that, yeah, it was kind of amusing.
You know, I'm just thinking, like, as far as, like, I guess the history of the slasher subgenre is concerned, this felt a lot more like, I'm not sure if you've seen, When a Stranger Calls, but in many ways this felt a lot more like When a Stranger Calls than it did Friday the 13th or Halloween. In this case, like, majority of it is more like, I guess, the mystery, the detective work than it is anything else. And, you know, When a Stranger Calls had very strong suspenseful scenes, but quite a bit of the movie, I'm not saying it's not good, but quite a bit of the movie is much in the same sort of dry vein. What do you think about the gist of this one? I know you can't see me, but I was doing a finger quote over gist because I don't think it was that great.
I mean, the funny thing is, I mean, this was also a first-time watch for my wife as well, and she kind of guessed it already halfway through the movie. Well, not exactly who it was, but she made a pretty good guess. Like, she was saying less than halfway through the movie, I think the killer's a woman, you know. Actually, I should say spoiler alert, actually. Let me do that again.
To be fair, there are plenty of women in the movie who the killer might be.
Yeah.
Is it the lesbian hard mistress? Is it one of the students with the teacher? Who knows?
Yeah. So she didn't say, oh, it's this one, it's this one, but she was kind of on the right track there. For me personally, I actually never even think to... Like, for me, I never try to solve it before it happens. That's just not how I approach movies. I just literally sit down, I watch it, and, you know, because I guess mainly because, you know, these type of twists that you have in horror movies, they don't go too many different directions.
Yeah, I'll just say, I think, post 2000s, I think those horror movies, when they went with plot twists, had a little more, I guess, a slightly more freeform approach that I liked a bit more. I mean, back in the 70s and 80s, I mean, there were some interesting ones. I mean, look at Sleepaway Camp. But for the most part, yeah, I don't think the twist necessarily changed much. Right? But it's so interesting, but the ending to this one, again, it just felt, I don't know, I think I mentioned, it just felt lifeless. Like, I mean, people watch the original Friday the 13th, so they watch all these 80s slashers, even Prom Night. I even like Prom Night, but those movies they just feel a bit better than this one does, in my opinion. Which is a shame because I actually really like the idea, but the way they went with it it didn't really appeal to me.
Yeah. Slasher movies are probably my favorite subgenre of horror.
It's not vampires?
Hell no. And I think for me, I'm more interested or attracted to the aesthetics of the movie rather than the technical plots and things like that. So, you know, I much prefer the way a movie looks than it actually unfolds, you know. Anyways, I guess the only other point that I had to make, or that I wanted to highlight, was after that one scene where that woman working at the diner, you know, we see what happens to her, and then I guess her boss or the owner or whatever you want to call him, he comes in, sees the place all messed up, and he's also got two guys with him who are hungry. I just thought it was really funny how they were just really on his ass to start making them some food. They're like, will you make with the food, Gus?
That's the American way.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, that's the, as soon as they get the boom, they want some food. I mean, it takes a little time.
I mean, you're dealing with, a potential break-in or something happened, and they're like, don't worry about that, just make our food.
And yeah, like I said, I actually think that scene was decently suspenseful. I like how they sort of drawed it out a bit. I mean, we pretty much knew what he was going to find, but I sort of like the way they did that. So I'm not going to say it's a highlight, but I think it's one of the better scenes in the movie.
Yeah, it started to become, okay, when is he actually going to stumble across this body or whatever he's going to find? Because we see certain scenes where he's like, okay, he's about to find a head in the fridge, and, you know, they do that so many different times until he gets to the point where he actually does find something. Yeah. You know, night school, it was an okay time for me. I was expecting a little bit more from it. I was hoping for it to be at least a 7 out of 10 movie for me, but it ended up being a 6 out of 10 for me. I'll certainly give it another chance many years down the line, but it's certainly not a movie that I'm looking to go back to anytime soon.
Yeah, I think the main problem at Night School is that it just so often either the characters aren't that engaging or the story is just a bit dry. I mean, I guess I liked the two main detectives. I think they were okay, but there wasn't that much in this movie that I could see myself, thinking, hey, I've got to, watch this again. Like, I enjoy watching Halloween, I enjoy watching Friday the 13th, but I just couldn't imagine throwing this one on for enjoyment after seeing it. Especially after seeing it twice. It's a few decent scenes. And like I said, I do like the hypocritical lesbian school mistress woman. That, again, it just cracks me up. I'm going to concur and give this a 6 out of 10. Especially for the time this came out. I mean, if it was like a mid or late 80s, I could understand the star power slasher. But in star power slasher from the early 80s is just really disappointing. So it's okay, but it's not great, and I can sort of see why I don't see that many people talking about it. Speaking about failures of movies, next up, we have the Marvel classic Jack Frost 2, Revenge of the Mutant Killer Snowman from 2000. Now, we spoke about the first Jack Frost a few shows ago, it's pretty recent, and I think we both had pretty similar opinions on that one. This one uses the sort of follows up from the story a year later. At the end of the first Jack Frost, they buried the antifreeze which had destroyed Jack Frost, and then it's discovered, and through some scientific mishap, Jack Frost is able to return and get his revenge on Sam's character, who is taking a second honeymoon, I think, with his wife on this sort of like a tropical island type place. So it's Jack Frost in a warm climate for a bit. This movie really amps up the silliness and the I don't know, sort of a stupid comedy. The first movie had a bit of that, but this movie really went balls to the wall. And if you're familiar with my my sense of movies, I don't care much for that type of style. I remember when I first saw this movie, I gave it a 1 out of 10. And I saw it again, and I don't think it's quite that bad, but I'll be honest, I don't think it's that much better. And I have some more specific complaints about some of it, and some of it's, I think, somewhat valid too. But before I touch that, what are your views on this one?
Yeah, I remember watching this one a long time ago, maybe a couple years after it came out. And the only thing I could ever remember really from it was like these ice cubes craving to get on this hot chick's nipples or something.
Of course, that's the thing you would remember.
Yeah. Yeah, but I don't recall liking it back then. I watched it again. It's definitely nowhere near as good as the first movie, and there's a lot of different reasons why. I don't think it's as bad as I was anticipating it to be upon rewatching it, but it's still definitely on the more mediocre side. I mean, it starts out with this super widescreen. I don't even know why, or why that was necessary, but they decided to do it. And then after, well, the funny thing with that opening scene is, I actually think the story he's telling about Jack Frost would be hilarious had you not, or like had the first movie not existed, because hearing, I think the moment where he said, "Now tell me how you killed him," and he says with antifreeze, that is actually really funny, I think. But I mean, considering we already know that from the first movie, it kind of deflates the humor in it a little bit. And then we go to the title screen, or the font. You know, Jack Frost 2, but then they've got the Return of the Mutant Killer Snowman in this this font that I see used in so many places. Even local businesses in my area use that font. I mean, it's not the most it's like the most common speciality type font, I think, at least back around that time. It just feels so cheap, and that's how this movie feels at times, at least compared to the other one. It feels cheaper. Obviously, I'm guessing it had a lower budget. I didn't look at the budgets or anything, but it just feels overall like a lower quality movie. Not that the first movie was extreme quality, but yeah, there's a lot of different reasons why this one pales in comparison. And I'll mention a few other things, but just so I stop talking for a little bit. What else did you want to say about this one?
Well, a big issue for me, and leaving the comedy aside, once Jack Frost gets to the island to exact his revenge, he has a pretty decent scene where he sort of slaughters a bunch of people who are having like a snowball fight. I mean, it's a tropical island, but he was able to sort of transform the local water to like a more wintry climate to suit him, which is fine. I didn't mind that. So he has a scene where he slaughters a bunch of people, which I think was an okay scene. And then he sort of disappears for like 20 minutes, and then it's a bunch of like baby snowball type things, which are the main problem. And they actually dispatch one of the main characters. Actually, it's a recurring character from the first movie, played by a different actor, but it's still a character from the first movie. That whole part, I mean, I was already having issues before that. Like, the whole Ice Cube scene, like, it's... like, maybe if I was a kid, I'd be a bit more amused by that. But it just... I was watching it... I mean, I was watching it by myself, but I was still cringing, like, through most of that. It's just so ridiculous, and... like I said, it's not my style of comedy. But when they're trying to deal with, like, the baby snowball thing, and it's like, oh no, that's not very nice. Don't do that. it was a struggle to get through. Like, it was just difficult.
Yeah, the addition of the little snowball creatures, or whatever you want to call them, throughout or towards the end of the movie, kind of felt like they were trying to. Well, it's kind of like Gremlins, but with much shittier type, effects and creatures, or whatever you want to call them. Yeah, just, it's a perfect example of comparing something that's cheaply done to something that's of much better quality.
If there's one thing I do want to mention that I like about this movie, I do think that it follows the first movie pretty well. And what I mean by that is it uses story elements from the first movie that, like the weakness that Jack Frost has in this movie. It sort of makes sense in context to the ending of the first one. And I do like how they sort of used the first one to dictate how this one should go. It's a bit more consistent than what you might expect. And I do appreciate that. And I do appreciate how they showed them digging up the antifreeze, and instead of just it happening to be in a scientific laboratory, it shows them getting it. So, I mean, I like the consistency. It's just that the story that they went with, like, I'm not sure, that scene toward the beginning, like, there's two guys on a lifeboat, like, arguing over it. I think it was it a banana? It was, carrot. It's a carrot. Like, talk about the completely unnecessary scene.
Yeah, they were struggling at times, I thought, to really figure out the best way to move forward with the movie, but I think my biggest issue with why this movie is not nearly as entertaining as the first is that Jack Frost himself, I mean, we hear his voice constantly throughout the movie, but we don't really see him as the Snowman much, and that's the form, like, I guess his traditional form that people know him by and would like to see him as. So if they showed him more as the actual Snowman rather than just, some ice cubes or some liquid with some voice, maybe, just maybe, that may have made things a little bit easier for me to enjoy.
Yeah, actually, and just to show that my hatred of this movie isn't like complete, I also sort of liked the sort of element of the main character having sort of like a PTSD type thing. Like he can't, anytime he thinks of snow, Christmas, he just, sort of freezes up, pun intended. But, and like there's a point in this movie after he first tries to defeat Jack Frost and it doesn't work, he almost sort of becomes pretty useless. I mean, he sort of comes back in the end, but from that point on, it's more his wife that is a lot more of the individual who tries to get things done, which I thought was a sort of interesting change. I don't think it's entirely a great change, but I thought it was interesting. But all of that said, I think the movie is just a lot weaker, which is disappointing because even though the first movie wasn't amazing, I think it had a certain charm to it, which this movie, I mean, there's a few funny characters. The old, well, I don't know, I forget what the guy's name is, like the guy who was running the resort. He had a few funny lines. I sort of liked Captain Fan when he jumped into the bar. Hey guys, so he was over the top. He's sort of funny, but otherwise, I don't know if there's that much going for this movie unless this humor is the type of stuff that appeals to you.
I mean, the lead. The lead in the movie, Christopher Allport, who plays Sam, I kept thinking, I've seen this guy in other things other than the first Jack Frost movie. I was having a look through his IMDb. I didn't notice too much, but I did notice he was in Dead and Buried. He plays the guy at the beginning of the movie that gets burnt alive. I don't know, just kind of thought I'd mention that because I know you really enjoy that movie. I don't know if you recognized him from that.
Actually, I did not. Oh, hey, I'll be honest. Now that you mention it, it does sound familiar. His face in the beginning of that. I'll say that and Buried's a fantastic movie, and I had no idea this guy was in it. So, well done to Christopher Allport. It's a shame he died.
Yeah. Now, I guess the other question to ask about this movie is, does it, in your mind, qualify as being labeled a Christmas movie?
That's an interesting question. I'm not sure. So I definitely think it would qualify as sort of like a winter movie. Even though it was a tropical island, obviously once it was out snow covered, I think that sort of qualifies it. I don't think there's that many Christmassy things in the movie. At least not in my opinion. I mean, I know some people see snow and automatically think Christmas, but I don't believe Christmas came up all that often, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, I know they did play like a Christmassy type song a couple of times throughout the movie, but
yeah, which was horrible on a side note, but I don't know. I feel like, I mean, if somebody wanted to count this as a Christmas movie, I probably would argue with them. I mean, by all means, if you were to count this in any type of list, more power to you. But I probably wouldn't. I mean, I have no problem counting the first movie, but this one, it doesn't feel nearly as strong a connection.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that might be because, like you mentioned, we don't see him in a snowman form all that often. Like, if he saw him in that form, like, throughout the movie as opposed to just maybe 3 or 4 scenes, maybe you'd feel, I guess, a lot more authentic, but it just, we didn't get that. I did want to say that if there's one positive kill in this movie, I did like the tongues in the eyes. That was okay. But other than that, most of the other kills, I mean, being stabbed with an icicle is fine, but the whole like turning himself into an anvil and falling on a girl after trying to drop coconuts on her head. Yeah, that was another difficult scene. And I mean, I'll just go ahead and rate this. I mean, I'll be honest, I didn't come into this one expecting too much because I remembered too much about it from the first time I saw it. I actually think the opening is pretty funny, but it's just, the movie's just so much sillier than the first one is. And it's just disappointing. I'm going to give this one a 4.5, and I'll be kind enough to round up to a 5 out of 10, but it's definitely a movie that's below average, and there's a few enjoyable characters, a few enjoyable funny scenes, but overall, there's so many other movies I'd rather watch than this.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it this way. This movie came out the same year as Battle Royale.
Well, I'm going to give it a 5. And that's actually a little bit higher than I was anticipating. Which, I mean, 5, I think, is still an extremely mediocre rating for a movie. I know some people out there, you know, their scales might be different and they see 5 as an average movie, but, you know, for us, an average movie is more around 6 or a 7. So it's definitely below average. I still did have some fun with it. I did find myself giggling at certain things throughout the movie. It's just that the quality of the movie just dips and dips and dips throughout. It is a ridiculous movie overall, so you don't tend to give it as much grief over having terrible effects and things of that nature as you would if you were talking about something more serious. But at the same time, you can just see that this is just, it's just a shitty movie with terrible effects, and it's saved a little bit by the fact, or by the reputation of its first movie and having some of the same people return for this second movie, but yeah, it's definitely not something I can see myself wanting to watch again, if anytime soon. But I guess one thing that I should also mention is that they really go to great lengths with the product placement for that beer. Because the funny thing about it is, whenever I go to the theaters these days, I actually see an ad for that specific beer before almost every movie I watch. I had no idea it was around back 20 years ago, making appearances in Jack Frost 2, of all things. This Japanese beer, or whatever it is.
It's funny, because I actually had no idea that was a real beer until just now.
Yeah, they have a very serious type ad of this Japanese businessman drinking one of these, at least in the theaters that I go to, but yeah, I was surprised to see it was around back then. But looks like they're ahead of the game, and they've been using movies for 20 years to advertise their beer.
If I was them, I'd recommend using better movies.
Well,
although, to be fair, if you're watching Jack Frost 2, maybe you would like some beer to help you through it.
Plus, I'm guessing they didn't charge them much to appear in the movie, because the effects don't look like they used all that much money.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's sort of what you would expect from early 2000s movies, but it just looks so aged.
Yeah. Well, around this time we were getting a lot of shitty, like, straight-to-DVD movies, and, you know, so around this time you would see a lot of stuff of this quality hitting the shelves.
Speaking of low-quality movies.
Hey! Hey, it's by the guy that did the first, well, not the first one, the second one. The one that I love. Anyways, Kickboxer 4, The Aggressor from 1994. David Sloan is back again. This time he's been framed and sent to prison by Tong Po, who has also kidnapped Sloan's wife. Tong Po's, he's since become a big drug lord in Mexico that the feds cannot get close to, and so the DEA offers Sloan a pardon from prison to compete in an annual fighting tournament that is held by Tong Po in an effort to eliminate him. So, I mean, I guess I should quickly say for anyone who hasn't watched any of our previous Kickboxer reviews, number 2 is my favorite movie. Well, my favorite from the series, my second all-time favorite film. So I give that a 10 out of 10. First movie I really enjoy, I gave that a 9 out of 10. And the third one, I gave an 8 out of 10, just because mainly because it had David Sloan and Zian, 2 staple characters from the series. So for this one, we're missing Zian, which is a bit of a shame. We've still got Sasha Mitchell again as David Sloan, which is good to see. Even though we don't have Zian, we have Tong Po back, but unfortunately not by the same actor, which is evident by some terrible close-up shots. If anyone's looking even remotely close enough, you can see that this person has some epic makeup going on around their eyes to the point where it almost looks like they're wearing a mask. I mean, this movie, there's some positives. I mean, if you compare it to the previous movie, the third one, which I know in some people's eyes is I mean, in most people's eyes, it's definitely the weaker of the first 3 movies. And I guess the big thing about that third movie is that it doesn't really have as much fighting, or at least in terms of just being a martial arts movie, it's transitioned more to being an action movie with gun violence and things of that nature, and ultimately a bad guy who's not even a martial artist. Whereas this one returns more to the martial arts side of things. We've got the fighting tournament, so it's good to see some actual fighting in the movie. But it's also taken a bit of a hit in terms of the quality. I mean, there's a lot of mediocre acting, I guess. The story is a bit generic, or like it's just kind of been, we'll just write whatever and throw these characters in and let them deal with it. Yeah, it's probably the weakest of the first 4, but I still kind of enjoy it enough just because of some of the characters that I'm familiar with David Sloan, Tong Po, and things like that.
I guess my history, as many of you may know, I've never even seen any kickboxing movie before we started doing these shows. And I've enjoyed the first 3. I think the lowest I gave was, I think I gave the third one a 7, maybe it was a 6, but I think it was a 7.
This is a 7, yeah.
Yeah. So I've enjoyed the series thus far. This movie just felt rushed for one, which is its biggest problem. Its biggest problem is it felt somewhat lifeless to me. Like, the character of Sloan here, he almost didn't have a character. Now, some people might say, and I can get it, that, after being in prison, was it 2 years? It was for some time period that maybe sort of sucked some of the life out of him. Which I get, it would suck to be framed and sent to prison. But then the whole thing with his wife being a captive of Paul, like, we never knew the wife, she never appeared before, so it's just some random woman who we, the audience, have literally no emotional connection to. And to be honest, it didn't seem like Sloan did either. Like, I didn't get any soul from this movie. It was just characters going through the motions. I mean, the fights were fine, even though the final fight was, in my opinion, pretty weak. But it just, what I really think would have benefited, and I know these are, by this point, these are cheaply made movies. If they had made maybe 2 of these, like part 1, introducing the wife, and then at the end of part 1, him being framed, and then this movie, I think it might have gone over a bit better. It gave us more look into these characters, because by the end of the movie, I don't know a thing about the wife. Aside from the fact that she can kick ass, apparently, I guess, even though she was captured for 2 years. It just, I have a hard time feeling for any of these characters. And I just don't think the movie did a good job of, I guess, showcasing the lovability that we saw from the first few movies.
Yeah. Well, just touching on something I was talking about earlier with Tong Po being played by a different actor. They bring in this other guy, who I've seen in other movies. He was, I think it was in Death Warrant with Van Damme. Anyways, a lot of people give Tong Po, or at least the look of him in this movie, a lot of grief. I don't think he actually looks all that bad, at least in some shots. It's only the really close-up shots, especially the shots where they're looking from, like, looking upwards towards him. You can actually see, like, what the hell's going on with this guy's eyes. I mean, it really does look like he's wearing a mask. But if you took away those and you look at some of the scenes where he's shot from a bit further away, I think he actually looks pretty good. There is a part towards in the end fight where people are saying you can see his hair coming loose, which I don't know, it looks pretty cheap anyways. But yeah, that final fight is very disappointing as well. Especially when you consider the first two movies that you see Tong Po in, he's just so completely different in terms of his mentality in this movie. Like, the first two movies, he wouldn't run away from someone. Like, he'd just stand there and let you punch him. I mean, in this movie, it almost feels like he's a bit of a chicken shit. So it's kind of disappointing that, to an extent, what they did to his character by the end of the movie.
Yeah, I think the thing is, I guess the thing for me, if you look at the first few movies, I think they're pretty decent. And they had a chance to come back with this fourth movie. They had a chance to sort of, like, I guess, wrap it up and give, like, a big final, showdown between these two. I mean, like the beginning of this movie shows. Paul's, he cast the death of, like, two of his brothers. So, I mean, honestly, do we see? I don't know. I just don't see any emotion from Sloane. Like, I just didn't see any of it. So they had the potential to, like, have a pretty epic showdown, even with a lower budget. I think they probably could have done it if they had a better script. But it just came across as such a generic, like, hey, you have to fight these people, and then you can move up and fight these people, and hey, this final fight. It's just disappointing, because they had such a potential to do so much better. And I have no idea what the other movies in the Kickboxer series. I'm not sure if they bring Paul back in some form, but they could have wrapped it up with this movie and maybe make a movie on par with the third one. But the writing here was just not great.
Yeah. Well, as far as I'm aware, the movie, before it had even been filmed, had already made something like $6 million. So they got all these deals, I guess, to make and release this movie. For a low budget movie from the 90s, I mean, how often does a movie make that kind of money before it even gets made? But anyways, I did also pick up on the fact, and you can kind of see this in the movie, that as they were filming the movie, I've heard that one of the, and this is actually from the director himself, he said, like, there was a faulty plug on one of the cameras that resulted in some of the footage being kind of struck by light. And you can kind of see it in certain shots of the movie where it just feels like there's a little too much exposure or something. And apparently, so a lot of footage, well, I don't know how much footage or if it would have made a difference, but they did scrap a bunch of footage because of it. They just felt it couldn't be used because of the damaged plug or whatever it was on the camera that caused it. So, it would have been interesting to know if there was any other things they shot that may have made it different or better. I don't know, but just an interesting fact that I thought I would bring up.
I will say, I do wish, because you mentioned that what the guy's name isn't in this movie, the sidekick from the first three. They could have at least mentioned him in some way, like say, oh, he went back to, his home, just something. But I watched this yesterday, maybe it was 2 days ago. I don't think he was mentioned whatsoever.
No.
And it was just, some movies, let's Portuguese 2. The sister from the first movie wasn't there, but they at least mentioned her in that movie, saying, "Oh, she's off at school." It might come across as cheap, but at least they gave some type of explanation. here they give us nothing, and it's just disappointing. Like, it's not like it's life changing. Honestly, if he was here, I don't think the movie would have been that much better. But it would have been something. And also on the beginning of this movie, when he's writing the letter to his wife, I like how he's going over the events of the first few movies that I'm sure his wife already knows. And it's obviously just to fill in the audience with, just some backstory. So that was
I mean, I don't know to what extent she actually does know.
Well, that's because they never told us anything about her.
Yeah.
I mean, so I don't know if that's not necessarily something to give the movie credit for.
I guess one great thing about that opening scene, at least for me, because I'm such a fan of the second movie, is that it feels like just for a split second in that flashback, they use some unused footage from Kickboxer 2. It's like the closest thing to a deleted scene that I can come to. I mean, there's a scene where they show, I guess after Tong Po losing his first match, like from the first movie, where he's getting spat on, and there's a shot just before he gets spat on, like a very distant shot where he's kneeling down, he's wearing a suit. You can't tell because it's so far away, but if you look closely in HD, you can kind of see he's wearing a white shirt with a tie. And for anyone who kind of remembers part 2, that's the clothes he was wearing when he killed Van Damme's character.
Huh.
So that would have been filmed, I'm assuming, for part 2. And they cut out the actual fight scene with Kurt Sloan, who's Van Damme's character in part 2, but I've seen on multiple VHS cases, I've actually got multiple VHS releases of part 2 in my closet from all over the world, and some of them actually mention that Tong Po was punished by whoever his higher-ups are for doing that, because as we know in part 2, they wanted to do another fight to regain their honor, blah 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 blah. And so apparently they punish him, they put him through all this training where he gets all these scars, or these extra scars from all this punishment, and I guess that was a part of it, where he's kneeling down there receiving whatever punishment that was. So yeah, that was like the closest thing to a deleted scene that I could come to from the second movie, because I can't see anything, there's nothing else from that movie that I can come across, and I wish I could.
Well, now I guess my last question is, how do you feel about the character of Michelle or Mouse?
Well, yeah, I don't believe for a second that she would have won any of those fights that she did in the tournament. I mean, she is an actual real martial artist, that actress, but it just did seem a little ridiculous just because she's so small, and even though I'm sure she's a decent martial artist in her own right, she's competing against supposedly some of the best in the world, and I just don't... I mean, she looks like just more of a street punk, so I just don't see her winning any of those.
Actually, now you mention it, it's funny because when they first got to like the ranch, the main area, when they were going to like the first fights in the ball pin type place, like watching those fights, I didn't get from them like, hey, they're the best of the world. They just looked like pretty much the same quality of fights that they were having, that the bikers were having back in California. Like I didn't see high quality fighting there. Like, for the most part, it was just the same stuff as anything else. It was a little better during, I guess, the main tournament, but it just felt somewhat weak. Like, I mean, like, compare some of those fighters to the fighters from the first few movies. Like, there's no comparison.
Yeah. The bar fight that they have earlier in the movie is pretty entertaining, I thought.
That actually might be one of the best fights in the movie, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few funny things happening there. Like, I guess the main funny thing happening is that one guy who kept getting knocked into the glass, and you're just kind of waiting to see when is he actually going to get smashed through the glass, because he keeps getting knocked into it, but it just doesn't break. And then eventually it happens. And then also, in addition, there is a ridiculous moment where David, he gets some pool cues and like clamps some guy's balls, I guess, even though he's wearing jeans.
I mean, regardless, I say it looked painful.
Yeah. But yeah, there's a little bit of an entertaining fight, especially that one. I guess one other thing that I just wanted to quickly mention, I guess for horror fans out there, especially Friday the 13th fans, is that the beloved Tom Matthews, who plays Tommy Jarvis in Part 6, he's actually Tong Po's like servant or sidekick or whatever in this, so, you know, that might do something for someone out there.
You know, I'll be honest, I had no idea until you just said that.
Anyways, out of the first 4 movies, it probably is the weakest one, especially in terms of just quality filmmaking, I guess. I like that Tong Po's back, don't so much like that it was a different actor, and sometimes those close-up shots are just terrible. And we also miss Zian in the movie, which is a bit of a negative. I like that it's returned to more of a fighting movie than just an all-round action movie like the third, but it is lacking some emotion, and it just feels a bit off. But because it's still got David Sloan in it, it's got Tong Po in it to some extent, that's enough for me to at least be entertained enough, or at least glued to the screen. So I'll give it a 7 out of 10, and I know the movie in most people's eyes is not nearly worth that rating, but being a huge fan of the series, you know, that's good for me.
So I've seen quite a few, well, I guess quite a few might be a stretch, but I've seen a handful of like low quality action movies from the 90s. You know, just straight to VHS type stuff. And they can be entertaining, but they're not necessarily great or even good movies. And this movie felt just like one of those. It just, like, I guess it's okay to an extent, but especially given what they could have done with, in my opinion, about the script. Like, there's so much they could have done. I just think it came across as disappointing. And I definitely think the third movie, despite it sort of changing the style up, I think it was a much better movie. So I'm going to give this one a 5 out of 10. And my main issue is there's not much life in this movie, and it's just not nearly as entertaining as the first 3. So this is the first Kickboxing movie I officially didn't enjoy all that much.
Yeah. Just one other thing that I've quickly thought of mentioning, it's just kind of funny. Some of the sound effects for like the kicks and punches is just embellished so much, like the whooshing noises at the start. It's just like I don't think I've ever seen anyone in real life throw a kick that made a whooshing noise. But
well, you're still young. Yeah, so to finish us off for tonight, we have quite the well-known movie Battle Royale, a Japanese movie from 2000, based off, I forget, I'm assuming the novel came first and then there was a manga, but I haven't read either one. But we pretty much all know the story. A bunch of school kids get brought to an island. I think there's 42 of them, and they're told, hey, you have to kill each other off, and the winner, either one of you survives, or in 3 days, anybody left surviving dies. And they do so. And it is indeed a battle royale. I think this movie's I've seen this, let's say, 4 or 5 times. So I've not seen it like that many times, but I've never failed to have been amazed by this one. I legitimately think it's a beautiful movie. I think it's a fantastic movie. So to those of you who don't know, I write reviews for movies, and after I wrote my review for this one, I just checked out the length, and there's about 1,000 words worth of review. It's like 15 paragraphs. It's like more like an essay, and there's not that many movies I would write that much about. But Battle Royale, I think, has so many fantastic elements. I mean, I think it's the perfect movie, but I can understand some problems about it. But it's definitely an experience that I would highly recommend anybody, if you haven't seen it, I'd highly recommend you check it out. I personally do consider it like a horror action drama type movie. But I know there's a lot of people who don't see this even as a horror movie. Which is fine, because it sort of transcends all of that. So, it's a movie that I highly recommend. I think it's a very emotional experience. I just think there's a lot about this movie to enjoy. And I have no idea how Chaka feels about this one, so it's maybe an interesting discussion.
Well, yeah, this one had a lot of hype around kind of the early 2000s when it was getting seen by a lot of people. I don't think it necessarily got all that much attention until a few years later, once it got released on DVD in most places. I don't think I think it got released on DVD in Australia maybe 2003, maybe. So I saw it somewhere around that time. I remember renting it from the video store. And I didn't know too much about it going into it. All I knew was that people were saying it was good. It definitely surprised me, I think, because I tend to not avoid, but I definitely limit my viewing of foreign movies, just because I guess I'm someone who just feels like reading subtitles is a chore. I know sometimes you can get dubbed versions, but we all know that sometimes dubbed versions just make the movie ridiculous anyways. But yeah, I thought I liked the movie. I think the idea is truly horrific. Especially, I mean, there's two ways to look at it. Back then, when I first watched the movie, I mean, my daughter, I think she was only just born, or hadn't even been born at that time. It was right around that year that she was born, and now she's around the age that these kids are. She's 16, so just thinking of putting her in this, having her in this situation, you think, God damn, just randomly one day going to school or whatever, and then you're told, okay, now it's time to kill everyone.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, these are kids that you've been around your whole life, and then all of a sudden, all these friendships, you've known each other for years. It's like Lord of the Flies, only it's a lot more, I guess, aimed toward the modern audience. I first saw this when I was a teenager, I was like maybe 10, 11, 12. So it just like hit me hard. Just like imagine, a fascist government throwing kids into a situation like this, and it really is horrific.
It's kind of unfair that they all get given supposedly random things, but we know that some of it's not exactly random.
The fact that one guy came back for another bag, talk about a dick. Like, I sort of like how the teacher was like, okay, yeah, he can do that.
Yeah. And then, like you said, you've got these people, they've got all these different friendships, so some of them are expecting to still be friends and not kill each other, while some of them is like, well, fuck it, I'm gonna have to kill people so I don't die. And it is interesting to see all these different, who's... I wouldn't say... sometimes it's more mentally weak or mentally unstable. You've got all these different types of people. You've got the maniacs, and you've got the people who are trying to, band together and survive, even though there's technically no way to survive. Well, except for that one guy who's trying to stop the, whatever you call it, the neck things from exploding. Which I kind of found amusing that, this guy's got this computer.
That guy was one... I really liked that guy. That was a fantastic guy.
Yeah. But, it's definitely an intriguing movie throughout. I mean, it's even like watching just wrestling in a way, because they've got the Royal Rumble, which is a similar thing to this. You got like 30 people, and they're all fighting until there's one person left, and it's the same thing here, and it's intriguing to see who's going to bite the dust, who survives, or who wins, so to speak. It's always exciting, and there's no moments in the movie where I felt disinterested. So even though there are certain movies or certain parts to the movie where it slows down a little bit, it's always holding my interest. So, and for a foreign movie to do that, that's I would say quite special, at least for me. Even though I still don't think it's a perfect movie, so I'm sure you're going to rate it higher than I will. But in terms of foreign movies, this is probably right up there with the best of them, in my opinion.
One of the reasons I think this movie works is, and like I said, I saw this when I was, somewhat close to this age range. But, all these kids, like they're just like young teens. They're still dealing with like crushes on each other, and they can't even speak to each other openly about emotions. And some of that might even be a cultural thing too. But like, there's a few characters in this movie. This one guy spends like half the movie trying to find this one girl, and then he dies, and then so he admits he loves the girl. And she's like, well, you never even spoke to me. Like, and it's just, that type of emotional, it's like, that type of attitude, like, back when you're a teenager, I certainly know that feeling. You have affection for someone, but you're too scared to say anything. And then being thrown in a situation like this, I don't know, it's a movie that has an impact on me. And especially, like, when you get to the end, like, the music throughout the movie is fantastic. There's a lot of, like, classical music and very strong, like, I don't know, that's really great music. And at the end, they have a song by an artist known as Dragon Ash, which is, I'm not going to try to pronounce the song title, but I think it's, ever since I first saw this movie, I thought it was a fantastic song. And there's a few things I would probably change. I'm not sure if this is in other versions of the movie, but the version I have on DVD has like sort of like 3 extra scenes at the end, like elongated dream sequences, and I'd probably those aren't really necessary to the movie, but I still think they were fun, and just the whole ending of this movie is just like an emotional roller coaster, and there's so many interesting characters. The brutality in this movie is top notch, which is controversial because these people are kids, and there's such great violence. A lot of it's gunfire, but there's just some like knives and sharp objects and that type of stuff. Some suicides. So it's a very interesting, evocative movie. And I've never seen the second movie. And to be honest, I sort of don't want to, because I've heard that it's nowhere near as good as this one, and I just can't imagine many movies being as good as this one.
Yeah.
But this is definitely a movie. Like, even when I first saw it, I didn't love it, but I still definitely appreciate what it's going for. And having seen it now as many times as I have, it's really a movie that leaves an impact on me. And it's just a fantastic movie.
Well, I did watch part 2 at one point, many years ago, probably like 15 years ago, something like that. I can't recall exactly, but I don't recall it being anywhere near as good as the first, but I don't think it was bad either. I'll have to watch that again. I don't know if you mentioned or if you plan to mention this, but I think it needs to be said. Fuck the Hunger Games.
Yeah, so actually I didn't mention that. I've never actually read the books or seen the movies, so I don't know. I don't honestly know much about the Hunger Games, so I didn't want to bring that up, man, because it's like I can bash on them, but I haven't seen them. So if you've seen them, by all means. But
it just feels like they ripped off this movie so much. Sure, they changed some details, but in essence, it's the same thing. And then, it's so sad to see, at least back when the Hunger Games was really popular, no one, outside of, obviously, horror fans or people who already had seen Battle Royale, it's almost like no one gave it any credit. They gave all the credit to the Hunger Games for having this wonderful, unique, brutal type movie, which we know has already existed in the form of Battle Royale. I mean, we see pro athletes reading the Hunger Games before their fucking match. I mean, for like, oh my god, it's such a great story. It's so, fuck it.
Yeah, so once I read the Hunger Games, I will get back to you on that. I don't see that happening anytime soon.
LeBron James can shove that book up his ass.
Yes.
Yeah. Anyways, that's all I had to say.
And actually, there's something else I think that might be worth mentioning. This movie, it's a pretty brutal movie, and it's, in many ways it's depressing. Though I do think the ending dialogue's like very hopeful, but there's also a little sort of like a black comedy element of this movie, like that video that they watch that explains like the Battle Royale program, like the exuberant Japanese woman. It's like, oh, it looks like whoever got this is going to be lucky. Like that whole little scene when they're watching the video, it's just pretty funny, and like especially the teacher Akitano, like toward the end of the movie, his like last phone call. It's just there's a few elements of black comedy thrown in here, which honestly they don't even, at least to me, they don't even feel that out of place. I'm not sure exactly why this is the case, but this movie just connects to me. And I don't know, I personally, there's so much engaging material here. There's so many interesting characters. It almost makes me sort of want to read the source material, because I know there's so much more backstory. I mean, that one insane chick. I mean, like that. There's a flashback toward the end of the movie. It shows like them playing basketball, and there's a flashback. When she's watching the game and she just feels so out of place. She, socially awkward. It just, I don't know. It just, there's so much here that it just makes the movie so much more. It gives it so much more depth. It's just fantastic. I can't say it enough.
Maybe it's also because you enjoy the fact that I don't know if it's Japan specifically, but I know somewhere in Asia it's quite common to find vending machines with used panties in them.
Well, I believe, to be honest, I've never heard of that, but I can believe that's a thing, and that certainly seems like something that would come from that part of the world. Be it somewhere in Asia or Australia.
Yeah, that's why it's hard to know how intentional the comedy is, just because sometimes some things they do are just so weird.
Well, yeah, actually, now you mention it, I read a somewhat interesting review from this movie, and it's from a Japanese guy, and it was sort of like a new perspective because, I'm from the USA, but, a guy who lived in Japan his whole life, looking at this movie and seeing that there's many things in Japan, a lot of the mainstream entertainment is it's more keyed into the youth. So, like, it's a lot more, I guess, I don't know, the entertainment, it's just more, like, childlike. And that's what a lot of people, enjoy in Japan, not just kids, but, like, throughout the age range. So, that's why, the one training video, I mean, it just, after reading that review, it just makes sense to me that some of this stuff is just the culture of Japan. And to be fair, I've obviously never been to Japan, but I just think it's for a foreign movie, this is just a very interesting look, and I'll be honest, I don't know much about Japanese government, but the idea of any government going to sort of like a totalitarian thing like this, even if was unemployment at like 15%, I think it said at the beginning, like, it just, there's so much interesting political stuff in this movie that they don't even touch on that much. So much interesting military stuff, and like I said, other cultural issues between the kids. Like even the main character whose father committed suicide. There's so much in this movie, which is why I certainly recommend anybody who's not seen it, give it a look. I think it's pretty obvious to say, and like I said, my review for this movie is like 1,000 words, and I'll post that eventually for anybody who may or may not be interested in reading my ramblings. But I'm giving this movie a 10 out of 10. which is pretty consistent to what I've given the movie every time I've seen it. I think this, like I said, there's a few changes I would make, but nothing serious, and I think it's a perfect movie.
I'm giving it an 8. I mean, that's my rating for a very good movie. I think, even if you're not interested in the emotional aspects of the movie, there's still enough entertainment here to at least be somewhat enjoyable. So it works on a number of different levels. No matter what you're trying to get out of the movie, you can get emotional things out of it. You can get violent entertainment out of it. I had a good time with it.